The session title for today is called Migrate Dataverse Data Like a Pro. The real main kind of aim or outcome of this is to hopefully showcase some of the options that are available to you when migrating Dataverse in and out of Dataverse. So just a quick agenda, we jump into it. A quick intro to who I am, for those of you that don't know me. We'll then jump into what options are available and how you can do those data migrations. We'll then look into Power Query, and there's a reason why I called that out directly, which we'll get into. And we'll look at some of the nuances within Power Query and some of the other options. And then hoping just to kind of open up to a bit of a discussion, because I'm really interested to know what other people are doing, maybe learning from others as well, because that's what we're all here at the end of the day. A quick intro about me. My name's Josh Giles. I'm a Power Platform Solution Architect at a company called Bridgel. We're based up in Glasgow in Scotland. I'm an organizer at the Scottish Power Platform user group. For those of you that maybe haven't attended, look into it. It's a really cool user group. We're really welcoming and friendly. We tend to host roughly an event a month, and we sometimes do in-person ones as well. I come from a M365 background, so originally started out in infrastructure, doing like typical IT support type things. Then moved into SharePoint, did that for a little bit, and then finally ended up into Power Platform, which is where I am now. It's been an interesting journey, one that I've enjoyed so far, and one that I'm kind of continuing, always learning new things in Power Platform. So it's pretty cool. I'm based up in Scotland, a very small town, kind of in the central belt in between Glasgow and Edinburgh, for those of you that kind of know your geography. So yeah. I'm originally from England, though, so that's why the accent isn't so strong. For those of you who want to connect, I'm always open to having a conversation on LinkedIn. So please feel free to reach out and connect with me. I also run a blog with a QR code on the screen there as well. I try and post regularly. Obviously, life gets in the way sometimes, so it's not as frequent as I'd like. But yeah, I try and post just some kind of interesting insights and stuff into there as well. So check it out if you get a minute. So the first thing I want to do is ask everyone a question rather than go into it. And that question is, what are you all doing with data migrations, with data flows or anything else like Excel? How are you managing that in Power Platform? So yeah, if someone wants to come off mute and answer, that'd be great. Just get kind of a bit of a discussion going.
Hi, Josh. We've just finished a rather large data migration between environments in our CRM system. And we did use Power Query, and what we did was use Power Query and then Power Automate to kind of patch over the small shortcomings of Power Query. It was quite effective, to be honest with you. Before, I've used the tools you can get for the things like the XRM toolbox and stuff like that. But no, I found that method quite effective, especially at maintaining GUIDs between the environments and the benefits you get at doing that. Because once you start losing your GUIDs, it turns into a bit of a mess pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Good method, and sound like you're quite had quite an experience with all of that stuff. So that's great, and we'll look to cover some of that today. So hopefully you'll learn something new, and it's good to kind of gauge that. Anyone else? Sean, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I thought data flows were awesome. I found them limiting in that certain fields can't be mapped. At least anything that I found, like status, for instance, like doesn't appear for me. And then overall, just the ability of like take data from one place, put it in like a staging table, do massaging there, then get into the final destination instead of just a copy over for like ongoing syncs for high amounts of data. I found it limiting. So I'm really excited to see like kind of like what you show to like potentially get around that, or just like throw some questions at you about it. I found it nice for like a few thousand once, but like ongoing, I felt like it was limiting.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, isn't it? And it sounds like we're all using a different combination of tools to try and get to the end result. And data migrations in Dataverse aren't as straightforward as maybe some other platforms in the technology space. So yeah, it's a really interesting one. Surab, did you have your hand up?
Hello, hi Josh. So, hello everyone. I'm very new to this Power Platform, and I have started learning from my own, from YouTube videos and other tutorial sources from Microsoft Documents. So, I have explored the data flow option to grab the data from SharePoint in Dataverse through the Power Query as well. Like it gives us the option of Power Query inside the Dataverse, inside the Power Platform, right? So it's very new for me. So I'm just hoping I'll learn a new thing, something new today.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Yeah, fingers crossed you do. I'm going to cover a few things in a minute. So yeah, it'll be good to see what people learn today. Zoltan, you got your hand up as well?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, because my microphone is a bit intermittent sometimes. So we have a few data migration projects in the company, and now we just started to adopt the Dataverse prod environments in Power Platform. And now we are using a mix of Power Query and virtual tables, and I just want to make sure that we do everything right and give a guidance to the users in those environments.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And I also have one specific issue which I'm hoping to get an answer for, but we will leave it at the end, and if not, then I will have to ask it.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it sounds like we've got a good mix of people here then with different levels of experience. So for those that haven't answered and maybe don't want to answer, I'd appreciate just maybe a thumbs up if you've had to kind of have a challenge or you've had to do a data migration into Dataverse. Yeah, so a good number of people then. So let's move on and see what options are available. I'm going to start really basic because sometimes the basic options are the best, right? But we then quickly realize as we get into the detail that we maybe need to go a bit further. But let's start with the most basic of basic ways to import data and export data out of Dataverse. That's our lovely friend Excel. Has anyone used this? A show of thumbs again if anyone's used this or maybe aware of how to do in Excel. Yeah, awesome. So we've got a good number of people that have done this. So really, I find personally that Excel is a great tool for doing the import and exports for simple data, for kind of largely static data or data that isn't very complex in nature. Personally, I quickly found the limitations within the platform using this method to do imports. I found that certain column types aren't supported. I'm sure we've all run into that limitation with certain column types. I also found that keeping track of what's being imported into the platform can be quite challenging sometimes. So I'm just going to jump out. So as I said, this is going to be a bit not very slide heavy. So I wanted just to showcase kind of where you go for that and how it works. So hopefully, all being well, the demos go well today. You can all see that, I hope, still. I'm going to jump into an app. So for those of you that aren't based in Europe, you might not know there's a big tournament going on at the minute around the Euros for football. So I've tried to keep this football theme. That's not to say that my data is accurate, because it's not. Unfortunately, UEFA don't actually allow API access to football stats, which is really bizarre, which isn't great. But anyway, yeah, so let's say I have a spreadsheet of data. I've also got data in SharePoint, so I can draw data from spreadsheets or SharePoint here, just with teams and whatnot. And I want to actually just bring that into Dataverse. Obviously, the really quick and easy way is just to export this as CSV, right? And then just import that as I need to. So I can export that, come into the Teams, and then I can do an import here as well, import from Excel. I don't know if I did that from CSV. I think I did. And this is the easiest way to do it. It's so straightforward because I can then just find my CSV file that's sitting in my downloads somewhere. I think it's that one. Yeah. And then I can just next through this. It gives me a few kind of simple settings, like what's the delimiter of my spreadsheet? You know, if it's a comma, what's the data delimiter? If it's a quotation mark. 9 times out of 10, I've always found that it's comma that we want to separate by, but some people might have weird data. I've certainly seen it in the past. So it might be something else, but you know, it's a bit limited. It only really allows a colon and semicolon otherwise. So something to take away on that for limitations. We can also specify if we want to allow duplicates or not. I don't, so I'm just going to click review mapping, and then I can do my map here. So again, because I'm only mapping one column, this is really straightforward. I can map lookups, providing things are kind of structured correctly. But again, I find it a little bit clunky to do. I'm sure others have found that as well. But for basic data, it's really straightforward. So I know that my main column is called title, so I can just do that. Click finish import, and that's it done. So I can track the progress, and if I click on that, it's going to take me to a progress page within my model driven app, and I can actually see, along with all the other stuff that I've been testing, I can see what I've got here. So yeah, it's not very informative. You just have to keep refreshing it and hope that it works. But we'll come back to that in a minute, and we'll see if it's actually imported. I've not got a lot of data there, so hopefully it won't take too long. You can see the status updates as we get through things. So yeah, so let me bring the slide deck back up now, and we'll move on to the next bit whilst that's loading in. So yeah, we've talked about Excel. We've got Dataverse import. So this actually allows us to open up almost like a live connection into Dataverse using Excel. Has anyone used that or had experience with that at all? I'm assuming yes, even though it's quiet. So I'll run into this as well and how this works. But effectively, you know, again, it's a fairly straightforward method. You know, a bit more maybe flexibility in that you can copy and paste data, and maybe do a bit of like Excel shaping as well. So it's okay. I find it most useful for actually clearing table data down rather than adding things to it. But yeah, it's another valid option. I don't really find it, again, great with complex data types either. You know, it's not a good choice for that. And you'll probably find this is a common theme for a lot of these options as you get to limitations when we start talking complex data. So yeah, let's see if our Excel's completed. Yeah, that's great. Just in time. So if I go into, I think it was layers, or was it teams? Teams, there we go. We can see that everything's imported that I needed, which is great, and all the 20 rows there. So perfect. I'm just going to clear that down so we can see what that would look like on the next one. Just whilst that's doing that, all the data that I've got here was generated by Copilot, so it's not accurate. And it's actually quite interesting what it was spitting out at me at times when I was trying to generate this data, but it's a great way to get, you know, large lists of data really, really quickly, as long as you know what your prompt needs to be. So let's look at the kind of Excel route from Dataverse. If I go into Teams here, my solution, next to edit, there's like a little drop down button. I can click on that and click edit data in Excel. Open the file here. Hopefully it will open up. Yeah. Drag this over to the screen once it loads. And I think we're connecting. Perfect. So yeah, we get Excel and we get this add-in, which is our data connector, and that's straight into our Dataverse table. So I can now type in whatever I want in here. You know, I can type in, and it all will, once I click publish, it will then just send that back to Dataverse, which is great. So I have a little bit more flexibility here. So if I pasted in a whole bunch of junk here, you know, I get all of the Excel functionality that I need. And I also get all the columns from Dataverse as well. Again, you get kind of some of these junk columns that you might not want, but you know, they're good to have just in case you need them type thing. And if I click publish, it's fairly quick to do. It will then just basically create all those rows in Dataverse for me. So that's published. So let's go back to our app and refresh this now. And there we go. All our data's there. So fairly straightforward. And next one. Talked about Dataverse import. Our next one is the configuration migration tool. So this is more for Dataverse to Dataverse data rather than bringing data in. But it's a really kind of interesting one because we can actually do a bit more with it. We can automate it as well, and it does support more complex data types. So it's a valid option if we wanted to do, you know, environment migrations, that type of thing. I have read, and I don't know if it's still valid, but on the documentation that I've linked there are references to it, you know, only being really for test data. So take that with a pinch of salt. I don't know if it would cause issues if you're trying to do production data or if it's not guaranteed for that, but you know, there is just a bit of a caveat with that, and it might not be completely reliable. But you know, certainly, you know, where I've had to move maybe like dev environments or test environments around and needed the data to go with that, this has been great because I can just plug all of this into a Azure DevOps pipeline, and you know, it basically does it all for me in an automated pipeline step. So it's great. So we look at what that looks like. I'm not going to actually do a Dataverse to Dataverse migration here, but I can at least showcase what it looks like and what the outputs of that are. So I've got Pack CLI installed. I'm just going to get to that via VS Code. I don't think I can zoom in all that much here, but and then it's more basically to launch it. I'm just going to call Pack Tool CMT. And that will open up the configuration migration tool. So it expects a schema for it all to work. You can't just kind of like say, you know, take this data and put it here. You need to generate a table schema first before you export and import your data. So to do that, you just click create schema and then log in. Let's see, this should work. Perfect. And then I need to find the right solution, which is somewhere up here. There it is. I'm just going to say team, and then I'm just going to add the full entity. You can actually pick individual fields if you want, or the full thing. So I'm just going to pick the full thing for the sake of this demo and time. And then if I click save and export, it's going to want me to save that somewhere. So I'm just going to save it on my desktop, and I'll just call this team schema. And then it's just going to say, you know, the schema is complete. Do you want to export the data? So if I click yes now, and then it wants to know where to save the data. So I'll just call that team export and save on desktop again. And then when I run the export, it's going to fail. There's no data there at the minute. Obviously, I've just deleted that down. So it's failing because there's no data. But if there's data there, it's going to pick it up and it's going to save it in that file, which is great. So obviously, if we knew that data was there and it was working, I could then just click import. It's going to want to grab the zip file for the import. Because it's not saved, obviously it's not there, but that would just be a data import. Then you just click import data and that's it. So it's a really versatile and quick option for migrating Dataverse to Dataverse data. And you don't necessarily have to do all that much in terms of configuration because it's all based off of that schema. And I say the automation that you can get with that as well is quite nice. So Power Automate, this one's a bit of a funny one, to be honest. So we can use Power Automate to migrate data. If you're going to use it in its kind of rawest format and, you know, get items from your data source, loop through them and add a new row into Dataverse, then you're probably going to have a bad time because it's going to be really slow. You know, if you're talking hundreds or thousands of rows of data, then kind of good luck. There are better tools for it. But maybe if you're doing just a small subset of data, or you want to trigger something maybe on like a field change in an external system or a field change in your solution, then it's maybe a good option for copying data. But I personally wouldn't use it to do kind of bulk migrations. That's typically a route we all kind of first start with when we're looking to move items, you know, through different systems and solutions. But yeah, it's fairly.
I don't know if you can see hands up, but Sean's just got a question on this.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I can't see that because of the slideshow. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Josh, that configuration wizard you just showed, is that downloading the data to your computer?
Yes. Well, it's just the schema and then obviously the data in the zip as well. So because it's zipped up, it should be quite small. But yeah, it does it locally.
Okay, so it's just the schema. It doesn't get any of the records.
Yeah, if you unzipped the data zip, it wouldn't, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't give you like a logical breakdown of the records. Like you couldn't see it in like an Excel format. I think it's XML files. It's been a while since I've actually delved into that zip, to be honest. But yeah, it's more just like computer readable files rather than human ones.
Got it. Okay, because I was like confused. I was like, okay, but then how is it going to move the data from one place to another? I must have missed that.
Yeah, it's all contained in that data.zip that you would do as part of the export, and the schema just matches it all up. And I say under the hood, I'm fairly certain it's all XML files. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I'm fairly certain it's XML.
Okay, but it is download the data records onto your computer too?
Yeah, I believe so. Let's do it whilst we're here. Let's have a look. We've got some time.
I'm just curious because in that case, like, does it? What if you have millions or thousands? Like, can it? Like, is there a limit?
Good question. I don't know if there's a limit. I think the limit would probably just be your hard drive, right?
Right. That's pretty neat. And then I'm just curious how long that takes to get onto your computer. Not to delay what you got going on. I'm just curious if you have that on.
No, of course. It gets longer with the larger the data. So it's not necessarily very quick when you've got lots of data. So there's a bit of a wait. Obviously, when you've got a few records, it's fine. But yeah.
But it works with lookup columns as well. Because Excel struggles sometimes. You can't really publish from Excel. You look at the one with lookup. Okay.
Madhya, you've got a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to contribute. As far as I remember, yes, it downloaded the data inside the local computer, and also I remember Microsoft provided it was a kind of tool that you could move, or a best practice from Microsoft, that you could move data from one Power Page environment to another. And there was an schema provided from Microsoft that could bring all data from Power Page, download it, and then you could use it as part of ALM. But nowadays it is not needed anymore.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah. That's annoying that it's failed again. I think just maybe I've not got enough records. I've hooked something up wrong, but I'll definitely look into that for you, Sean, and drop you a message on LinkedIn and give you an update on that, because I'm curious now as well to see what the actual up is. It's been so long since I've looked at it, so
Yeah, maybe it'll be a blog post if it's cool enough. I just
maybe.
subscribed.
You never know. So I'll showcase some of the Power Automate stuff, and then where are we? Yeah. So I can get that to move. There we go. Now I really want to showcase Power Query, so I'll be quick with Power Automate because it's not the fun stuff. So yeah, Power Automate. You know, I'm sure we're all familiar with it on this call. I'm sure we've all used it, but effectively, you know, the main thing that we're doing if we want to migrate a data, we're getting our items from somewhere. Obviously, I've showcased SharePoint, so I'll use that. But you know, it could be Excel, it could be a third-party system. You know, we've got all these connectors we can hook into as part of the Power Automate experience. So you know, we can just use that. I'm still using the classic one. I've not actually took the leap of faith into the modern Power Automate designer yet. I'm kind of putting it off until I'm forced to. I think old habits die hard, but yeah, I've not actually delved into that yet. So where was I? That one. So I'm just gonna do that. So we'd get our lists, then a list. Sorry, wrong one. We'd want to get a list in a specific, not lists. And then we would just loop through it, much like that screenshot that you could see. And then it would loop through the records, and then you've got the option to do what you want with them effectively. If that means adding a new row, then that's what you would do. But because it's in an apply to each, you get the downsides of that, in that, you know, you're looping through each item one by one. You can turn parallelism on, which speeds things up. But if you're, you know, familiar with Power Automate, you want to avoid looping as much as possible, so that things are performant. Typically, I would never use Power Automate for anything the user's kind of waiting on, for example. But for background processes, it's not too bad. And then add that apply to each. This is then just going to take my value, and then I can just add Dataverse here. You know, I can do lookups in here as well. You know, I can maybe loop through my lookups first, and then for each lookup value, create the new parent item with that lookup value and that reference, or store the lookup as a variable. So, you know, I've got a lot of flexibility here as well. This is just a really, really straightforward scenario, just in the interest of time. And I foolishly named my table teams, and there's two teams, but I know it's that top one, not the Dataverse teams. So yeah, I could then run through that, and it would create. I'm not going to run it just in the interest of time, because I want to look at data flows. I think that's the one that we're maybe a bit more interested in. But yeah, we get the idea with that. So back to present. Yeah, so we look at data flows. We know it sounds like we've got a lot of familiarity with them on the call. For those of you that don't know what data flows are, they effectively allow us to use a bit of a more versatile method to handle data. They handle bulk data really well. You can transform the data that you bring into it using Power Query. Really efficient as well. I did a project recently with near on 1 million rows, and the data, the initial kind of sync was a little bit long, but after that it was really, really quick. So you know, because you can schedule the refreshes as well, the subsequent ones were just really, really quick for that amount of data. So so a data flow is kind of basically, it hinges on Power Query to do all of that. So if we look at what that looks like and how we can work with that, I've actually got a bit of a relatively good example for this. So let's see what that looks like.
while you're doing that, Josh, there's a question in the Q&A. Is there any limit of rows migration through SharePoint to Dataverse through Automate Flow?
Not as far as I'm aware. You might be limited by the SharePoint limits. I think it was at 5,000 items or whatever it was. But
yeah, there is an action limit on Power Automate action limit. It depends what license you have. If you have a premium license, then it's I think 100,000 actions per 24 hours.
Yeah, and you might get throttling as well if you're putting a lot of throughput through it as well. Parameters kind of tighten those kind of bolts up a bit recently, so you know the API requests and stuff is a little bit more strict than it used to be. So if you're doing big data though from SharePoint, my recommendation would be a data flow, unless there's a reason why you can't do that. I'm just going to create a data flow here. I'm just going to call that test. And we'll do a SharePoint list. I'm just going to copy my list here. And so you just connect using credentials into that SharePoint site. And then once you've got that, it will ask you to select a list. I'm going to use football data because there's some cool things in here. It gives you just an overview here. You don't actually do anything with this. You just basically makes you verify that it's all good. And I click transform data, and this opens up Power Query. This is where the magic happens. And really, in my opinion, this is a real kind of underutilized or not shouted about enough type feature. Just purely because you can do so much with it. You know, if you use Power BI, it's the same thing. So there's a lot of things you can do with this. Because I'm pulling from SharePoint, it also wants to pull the junk columns that you don't necessarily need. So what I like to do to begin with is just do a little bit of transformation, just housekeeping effectively, especially if I'm doing this for like production systems or something that might need to be kind of leaned on in the future. So I know I've got my title, and for some reason it's pulling through my fields is just field _1 to 8. I don't really know why. But I know I've also got team somewhere as well. No, I think it's that one. Cool. So this is player data. I've got a whole bunch of things here in terms of data. But on SharePoint, it's all just basically strings and whatnot. So it's not particularly structured great. You know, to bring this into Dataverse, you probably want to have a bit of a relational model. That's where it shines in Excel. So I know that I've got my player position here. That's one of the main columns. And I've also got the team they play for, which should be club and country. And then I've got some other stats as well. But that's not really important for this. It's just more to kind of fill out the data. I've got about 500 rows of data in here as well. So if I've got a lookup and I want to actually populate the lookup first, then typically what I'll do is just create multiple queries or multiple data flows to kind of bring that down. So if we look at player position, and I want to bring all of that data in as lookups first before I bring the kind of player information in. That's fairly straightforward to do because I can then just basically select all of my columns or just remove all of my columns and bring in the player position. And that leaves me with all the columns that I can import into my lookup table then. But there's a whole bunch of repeated data. There'll still be 500 rows here. It's just got rid of the other columns. So really you want to remove duplicates. And it's as simple as, I think it's transform, where is it?
Or right click.
Or right click, yeah. And remove duplicates. And that's going to bring it down, I think, in total, actually. It then ends up being like 4 columns, yeah. So now I can just bring that information into my table. What I would say is when you do that, you do get the option to load to a new table. Don't do that because it's always going to create it as like a, you know, the default publisher table instead. So I always like to create the table first and bring it in that way. Although my tables aren't prefixed much better, but this is just for demo purposes. So I know I've got a table called new player positions. If you're not using keys, you really should set up a key for all of these tables when you're doing data migrations, because it means that you can, when you then do the parent stuff, it's actually going to realize that you can map to lookups, for example. So I'm just going to have that key map there. And it also means if you do any refreshes, it will pick up if there's any, existing rows with those values and not import them. So yeah, so if I click next now, no, it doesn't like that because I've not mapped this to column type. So I'm just going to map this to a string. Just redo that now. And that's it. That's a really easy one. So I'm just going to publish that, and that'll fill in the table for me. So let's look at something a little bit more complex. So we'll use the same SharePoint list. The same data set. And again, I'm just going to trim out all of these columns because I only want those ones. So we've got a column here for club and country. We'll just call that team so we know what we're talking about. But it's comma separated. So, as is, that's not really going to offer us much value in Dataverse. The main thing that we're doing here is trying to make the user experience better. If we imported that into Dataverse like that, the end result is going to be pretty poor for the user. So we want to split that out so that it actually makes sense. So what we would probably want to do in Dataverse is have two columns. We'd have a column maybe for team and another one for club, or something like that. It doesn't have to be that, but you get the idea. So how does that work? Well, this is quite straightforward as well. Because it's comma separated, we can just split the column into two. So you see there, I can just click split column by delimiter. I want to say I'm going to split it by comma. If I do that, it's going to split it into two columns. So now I know that I can import this data, and I can import the team data, and I can also import the club data as well. So you can start to do some really complex things with Power Query. We use this for Power BI, so the kind of complexities we can do with this. Let's say I wanted to have my countries mapped as choices. We probably would never do that, but and in Dataverse I've got choice values. Well, I can quite easily say, well, actually let's add a new column, and we'll say it's a conditional if team.1 equals, let's just say Portugal, then we'll set that as whatever value would be in Dataverse, whatever that string would be. That should add the column, where it's matched to Portugal. It would then set that as the value, so that if you were then importing that as a choice, you just match it on the value instead, and it would work. So that's quite a good option. So yeah, it's probably a good way. If I click next on this, I think I added the column before I set this up. So let's load this to the player table now. And I've got my key set up. And yeah, you can see so we've got all of these columns, and that's obviously the name of the column in Dataverse. Some of them look a bit odd, right? So if we look at ones like name, that makes sense. But then we've got position. And because that's a lookup column, and I've got a key for that, I can map to that. So as long as you've got a key, you can do lookups. One of the common challenges I encountered when I first started doing this was people saying, "Oh, we can't actually do lookups," but you can. It's just you need to make sure your data's mapped correctly first. And by that, usually it's a case of taking your source data, getting the lookup values first, putting them into a Dataverse table, and then doing the actual main data migration after that. So you end up with these, maybe numerous data flows to do kind of larger ones, but you kind of get the idea with that. So if I do title, and then that would be we've got team choice might work, and then team isn't there because I haven't created a key. So I wanted to showcase that mainly for that reason. If we come into team here in Dataverse and click keys, click new key, obviously I'll now just set up a key and just call it, team name. And just map it to the name field. It just means that we're going to enforce uniqueness on the table, which is beneficial. And that's going to set up in due time. So in the meantime, I'll just click next on that. I'll map our columns properly first to the right data type. We'll just say that's a string, and that's a whole number. That's a string. And that's a string. Perfect. Now if we come back here, we go into teams, and we can see if the other ones migrated, which it probably might not have done as player positions, wasn't it? Yeah, so yeah, we can see that the data's pulled in there nicely. Now I can set that up on a refresh schedule. I can also call data flows via Power Automate, which are quite cool as well. I think someone mentioned that earlier. So it becomes quite a good option. So data flows are probably your best method for doing, data migration into Dataverse. It supports everything, and once it's into Power Query, it doesn't really matter what that source data is, because you now have the ability to shape, transform, and model that data so that it matches kind of best practice for Dataverse. So yeah, if you're not using data flows, definitely start looking into it and how that can benefit you. So data flows, Power Query, nuances, I think I've just kind of covered that as well. You can, a lot of it's based on your data types around the nuances. Things like image and file columns don't particularly play nice with most of this. I think it works fine for the configuration migration tool, but yeah, for files and stuff, you might need to lean on, say, like Power Automate to do certain functionality or bring that data in. And if you're using SharePoint, some of the columns don't necessarily play nice. People columns come to mind. You might need to do a bit of kind of mapping on that. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of things to keep in mind. It's just kind of knowing kind of what that is and how to overcome it. And that's it. So I just wanted to open the floor up to any Q&A and discussion. Obviously, in the interest of time, maybe not gone as much detail as some people might have wanted, but hopefully you've learned something new. So yeah, I'll open the floor up now to any Q&A and discussion that anyone's got. Sean, you can go first. Your hand up first.
Sure thing. I think Gulshan and Tim were actually ahead of me on raising their hands.
Okay, oh,
never mind. It says I'm first. So, okay. I thought I saw them on the UI. The status field. Am I allowed to map to it? Like, am I losing my mind here?
The status field, I don't know. I've never actually had to do a status field mapping. I don't know if anyone else has. So I might kind of put that on to someone else if they've had to deal with that. My assumption is because it's got values, you might be able to just map the value rather than the like the title of it. So that might be an option. Because under the hood, it's still just a choice column effectively, just with a bit more kind of strictness to it.
Yeah, I explored. I was getting stuck, but I'd love to hear other ones. I think my big question is, if I want to do an ongoing sync from, like, let's say a SharePoint list and a Dataverse table, so when records get deleted from the SharePoint list, they also delete them from the table. Like, it has that option. But if I also want to add some manual records to that table myself, from what I know of that sync, when I turn on also do deletion, it's going to go delete my manual ones as well. It's going to be like SharePoint's the authority, Dataverse can just hang out. Like, am I missing something?
No, I think that's right. At that point, would a virtual table maybe be a bit of a better option, because that does allow for that bi-directional sync, whereas the data flows may be a bit more of a one-way thing, right? I've kind of started playing around with virtual tables a little bit more, and it's they're good for some things, not everything, but they're good for things like that, for example.
If I could just pop in here, just to give you an idea, Sean, the ingestion of data through Power Query doesn't necessarily need to be single source, single destination. You can have multiple source, single destination. So we've actually had that exact scenario. And what we did is we had an additional field on the Dataverse side, just say like do not delete, which is a yes, no column. And then what we do is we process the data through Power Query, and then we actually pull in the Dataverse table into the Power Query as well, just filtering on that field. So what you actually do end up with is you're ingesting from two sources there, and it keeps your fields in place. It keeps your rows in place as you need them.
Got it. So you do like a filter down one, but even when you configure it to be able to delete from the source, it won't delete the ones you manually create?
Exactly, because they will be in the data set that's being imported because you drag them in.
They will be in the data. Oh, I see. So you're doing, okay. So you're pulling in two data sets in one. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
That's it. Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Tim, you're next in the hands up list.
Hi. Just two quick points on data flow. So I've used them quite extensively in a recent project that I was involved in. The first one was similar to Sean. We wanted to map to the owner table and we couldn't. And I think you just can't do that at the moment in data flows. And I know you said about the choices, but you can't actually get it to show up in the view of what you can map to. And the other thing we noticed, found out, was lookup columns. As you say, you can map to them using keys. But what you can't do is if you wanted to update it, a lookup column to remove the value. So if you had an optional lookup column, you can't actually do that with a data flow at the moment, which was something we found. So we ended up, because we had an incorrect mapping, so we ended up having to write a Power Automate flow to actually clear the lookup values in there. But otherwise, it is, as you say, it's really good, the tool, and but the other gentleman just said about being able to merge and map and join to different tables to pull data. It's really good at doing that. It gives you a visual view of the join types, which makes, because I can never remember which way around joins work. So I think it's really good.
Yeah, it's good. Obviously, all these limitations end up coming out when you start looking at these more complex data types and more complex projects. But yeah, by and large, it's great, and luckily we can kind of get by with a combination of tools half the time. So it all kind of works out in the end. Keith?
Yeah, so just a few points from me, again, just from where we've used the system before. One of the drawbacks that Power Query had, at least the last time I used it, they might have changed it by now, is override created on and created on behalf by isn't available. So if you were to have, say, production test environments with production, and you want to retain the created on field, for instance, you can't do that in Power Query at the moment. At least, as I said, the last time I used it. Small thing, but something to be aware of. But one thing that caught us out is you can't control the order of processing, right? So you can't control the order of import of data. So if you have, say for instance, you have two tables, and one table references another table. So we have a parent table referencing a child table. You can't control how those tables are imported into the system. So it's rare. It happened to me a couple of times where the parent data is being imported before the referenced data is being imported, so it fails because the data's not there to be linked up. So to fix that, you basically need to take control of it, and you need to take the reference table into a different flow, run it manually, and then run the parent table. It's a bit of a pain, but yeah, it's just something to be aware of when you're using these things.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And to kind of go back to your first thing with the dates, yeah, I've had a project as well where that was an issue, but I'm fairly certain the Excel import does support that. So it was one of these cases where we overlooked the simple option first and ended up finding that we can do that in Excel. So that was quite interesting. And yeah, with the data flow and the referential data, I end up finding that I'm just creating loads of data flows and then just staggering the refreshes for when it's a case of I need to do the syncs in particular order. So that tends to work. If you do them in the middle of the night, for example, that tends to be okay. But yeah, it's a really good point. It's not intelligent enough to realize there's a link there and we need the child data first type thing. So
given the fact you can call it from Power Automate, just essentially use Power Automate to orchestrate the order it goes in. So call data flow 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and then get Power Automate to enforce the sequence.
You could, yeah. There's no reason why you couldn't. To be honest,
does Power Automate wait for the data flow to finish refreshing before moving on, though, or does it just trigger and move on?
I'm sure there's two actions. I'm sure one of them is like when a data flow refresh is completed, if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain there's two actions to do a data flows. It's a little bit limiting, but yeah, you could, I'm fairly certain, do what James is saying there if you're that way inclined. I'm sometimes a little bit too lazy and don't end up doing that way, so I end up just doing it manually using the data flow refresh schedule. So
Hey, Josh.
Yeah. Sorry, who's next?
Sorry if they can go ahead. So it's not an issue.
Yeah, no problem. My question is, Keith mentioned that we can have multiple data sources as input, but at the end, we can only have one table in Dataverse for every data flow. Is that right?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, you can map many tables and do combination of data. So, if you're pulling in from multiple different sources, you can do that in a data flow. But the caveat is it is to the one Dataverse table. So, maybe you've got, I've had to do it before where I'm combining like SQL data with Dataverse, already existing Dataverse data, and doing a bit of kind of transformation on it before it goes over to another Dataverse table, for example. So yeah, it's only to the one place as far as I'm aware.
What you can do is you can duplicate the query and you can reference the query, which are two functions in Power Query. So I believe, if I was right, the duplication is actually quicker. But yeah, so you can say generate your query as you need it, and then if you actually need it in two places for whatever reason, you can duplicate it. But I think it needs to be in the same environment. But you can find ways around it. It's just you just have to do a lot of copy and pasting, really.
Okay. And one more question. Can we update data in destination? And if we can, then can we use one of the fields in our input data as the unique key but it is not a key or alternate key in Dataverse, but we might use the one in our input data. Is that possible?
Yes, I think so, if I understood the question correctly. You can do things like composite keys. As long as you put your key on the right column in Dataverse, it'll be fine. In terms of updating, yeah, you can update it in both. It's just if you update it in Dataverse and then it's different in your source, it might overwrite it, as far as I'm aware. So unless you turn on the I think there's a flag for that. So yeah, just something to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you so much.
Before we go on to Gulshan, Surab, did you have a question still? Because I know you want to say something.
Yes. Hi, Josh. So I just wanted to know, like, I can see there are two type of refresh settings in the data flow. One is the incremental refresh, and there is a normal refresh. So what is the difference? Like, incremental refresh takes the new data from the SharePoint list or whichever the source of that data, and what does the refresh do?
Yeah, so I guess it's somewhat self-explanatory in that an incremental refresh is just going to take the data that's changed and update that instead. So it's not going to look through the entire list. So it becomes a lot quicker. If you're working with bulk data, it becomes a lot quicker to work with if you use an incremental refresh instead of a full one. Although, to be honest, I typically just stick to full refreshes, and they're still fairly quick, even on large data sets. But evaluate that when you start building them and maybe testing them out to see what works better. So, yeah.
Okay, so even if some records have been deleted from the, suppose if some records have been deleted from the SharePoint list or whichever the source is, that after the refresh, that would be deleted from the new Dataverse table as well, right? Which we are creating to the data flow.
Yeah, I believe so. You might have to put that flag on just to say that it will obviously delete it in the destination as well. But as far as I'm aware, it should.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Just a little conscious of time now, so I'll take Gulshan and Zoltan's questions, and we'll leave it there. So
that was a quick one. So can you
There's just one from Benji in the Q&A as well, Josh, just so you know.
Okay.
Can you import to and from system tables, or it has to be a custom table in Dataverse? So like contact tables and stuff, can you modify those and import into
Yeah,
those
you can. You can import into the contact table. I've done that.
So if let's say you want to change the default ownership of the contact for a row in a contact table, can you do that?
No, not within a data flow. The owner table can't be modified, sadly. You might be able to get away with that using Excel, because when you do an import, you can change who the owner is, but you might have to refer back to something like a.
Would be the difficult part of that.
Yeah, Excel might do it. Power Automate might as well. So explore both of them. Gulshan, do you want to ask a question?
Sure. Two quick questions. Any limit on the number of records that we can import using data flow? And the second is honoring the record creation date.
Yeah, so the limit on data flows, I think there is one on the docs, but I can't remember what it is. So I've done close to 1 million records through a data flow, and it's been okay for a single query. So yeah, I think there is a limit, but someone might know better than I do on that. And the created on date, yeah, we can't modify that. And you've got that overwrite created on date as well. I think we can't map to that either in a data flow, but you can do that in Excel, or potentially Power Automate as well. Again, as your kind of backup.
Thank you.
Please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to have a bit of a discussion or help you with anything that you may have on that. But yeah, absolutely. Thanks you so much for coming along and hearing me ramble for close to an hour. It's been much appreciated.
Well, that was a great interactive session. So yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you soon. Just another shout out to the Scottish Power Platform User Group. It is awesome. So everyone goes to the next session. When is that, Josh?
It is next
Yeah.
Tuesday, so put it in your diaries, come along, and we've got we've got some awesome speakers, including someone on this call who we're looking forward to having on. So yeah, really looking forward to it.
Awesome. Great. Everyone have a great evening, and see you all next week.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.